Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to give it maybe one more minute for folks to sort of join, if that's okay. Just one more minute before we begin the conversation. Awesome. Great. All right. Hi, everyone. Like I said, my name is Saurav Upadhyay, and I am the research manager at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. Today, I have the honor of moderating this panel conversation on advancing the use of GIS in peacebuilding. From seeing the impact that it has had on the humanitarian and the development sector, we at the Alliance for Peacebuilding believe that the emerging technology of geospatial information systems, GIS, can be a useful tool to the peacebuilding sector as well. As a network of more than 150 plus peacebuilding organizations, we are interested in engaging in and facilitating this conversation on GIS because we want to better understand the ways in which GIS can support, complement, and or enhance the work that peacebuilding organizations are doing around the world. We in the learning and evaluation team, specifically at AFP or Alliance for Peacebuilding, support peacebuilding organizations with design, monitoring, evaluation, and learning activities. And we are particularly eager to learn about how GIS technology can be used to support MEL. We already see its immense potential being realized in like conflict mapping. A really excellent example of this is the work of colleagues at ACLIT, for example. However, we are interested in exploring the potential of GIS in other phases of the peacebuilding project cycle. And through this conversation, we hope to learn not only about how to use GIS to support peacebuilding programs and projects, but also about how we can make GIS tools and resources more accessible, especially to local and grassroots peace organizations. So to help us have this conversation, I have requested the support of three amazing colleagues, and it's my pleasure to introduce them. Our first speaker is Olivier Cartere. Olivier is the Director of Humanitarian Solutions at Esri, which is the world's leading mapping and spatial analytics solutions provider. We are also being joined by my AFP colleague, Shazia De Young. Shazia is the Senior Research Associate at Alliance for Peacebuilding. And finally, we're being joined by Laura Mills. Laura is the co-founder of Data Science for Sustainable Development. Before I begin with the conversation, I want to say that through this conversation, we're hoping to bring the tech, the GIS, and the peacebuilding community together. And in the spirit of promoting this collaboration, I, of course, want to encourage you to pose questions to the panelists using the chat function, I believe, and it will be relayed to us in our Zoom. And I also want to encourage you, and I welcome you to share your thoughts, your ideas, about how GIS can support peacebuilding initiatives. So without further ado, I want to begin by asking Olivier. Olivier, of course, I earlier spoke briefly about the use of GIS in humanitarian and development settings. Could you talk about the Humanitarian GIS initiative at Esri, its current ontology, and lessons that we in the peacebuilding field can learn from that initiative?
Thanks, Saurav. Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. In fact, plenty to talk about. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. As Saurav said, I'm Olivier, Director of Humanitarian Solutions at Esri. Great pleasure to be online with you all to present along with you, Saurav, with Chaz and Laura. This is a quick outline of my contribution today. So I'll start by linking peace and GIS, so to speak, give a bit of context there. And then I'll draw some parallels with the humanitarian GIS experience of the last couple of decades. In fact, you'll probably sort of see this as more of a cautionary tale of that experience, I think, for us to learn from. And then finally, a quick overview of the Humanitarian GIS Hub, and which we've been working on this past year. And it might provide some concrete inspiration of what could be done towards realizing this idea of GIS for peace. So just a bit of context, I'm part of a team at Esri called Industry Solutions. That basically acts as a liaison between Esri and a particular sector of work, provides a strategic cap on the support that we provide that sector. So in my case, the humanitarian sector. And so we provide we help Esri navigate that sector, the humanitarian sector, and help the humanitarian sector navigate Esri. And ultimately, to contribute as best we can to the humanitarian sector deriving maximum impact from GIS. And I thought I'd give a little bit of further background, and only because this is actually quite relevant to today's discussion. So prior to joining Esri, I was heading up the Information Management Division of the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining, which happens to be a long-time partner of Esri's, in fact. And it's while working on the information management system for mine action, which is a system called IMSMA, that the GICHD manages and maintains, develops for the mine action sector, that my former colleagues and I started thinking more broadly about the concept of GIS for peace. So IMSMA is a system that's built completely on GIS to support national mine action authorities in managing the risk caused by landmines and explosive remnants of war, mapping where they are, prioritizing the removal, monitoring progress, and so on. So it's in its own way, this IMSMA is a GIS that supports a specific angle of peace building. Mine action is, if you think about it, all about recovery after conflict, about restoring safe lands and livelihood, but also restoring trust between conflicting parties through joint demining teams, for example. So then we started wondering what other areas of peace building were applying GIS, and if there was such a thing as a GIS for peace community of practice. And we soon found that, okay, so GIS is used here and there. You mentioned a couple of examples there also with ACLED, the massive geodatabase of conflict there. But there didn't seem to be a sort of coherent community of practice focused on sharing knowledge and experience on applying GIS and spatial analysis to peace. So the closest we came to was, in fact, the humanitarian GIS community, that of course overlaps a lot with the peace building community. It responds to humanitarian crises that are very often caused by conflict. So I just wanted to say all of this really to say that a lot of what follows is really a sort of excerpt of a concept that was proposed a few years back there by JSHD, and that was recently picked up by yourselves, so your colleagues at DSSD and AFP, and it's just really exciting to see the momentum on this discussion pick up again. And also just wanted to thank Branka also for and the organizing team of the event, by the way, for making space for us in this event's agenda. Now, I am absolutely no expert in formal theories of peace building, so I absolutely stand ready to be corrected by all of those of you who know much more than I. But intuitively, our starting point when we started thinking about the relevance of GIS to peace was that surely there is a strong link. There must be a strong link between conflict and space. Conflicting interests in the use of space or a particular geography and the resources within it. So we started from this principle that maybe peace comes in large part, when we find a way of sharing space in non-violent ways. And in fact, our director at the time, GISHD's director, Ambassador Stefano Toscano, said in a speech at Esri's user conference in 2019 that the peace is not about the absence of conflict. It's actually about the resolution of conflict in non-violent and collaborative ways. And so by providing a means to manage space and conflicts of interest within space at any scale, so from managing how neighborhood green spaces are used by different communities with different traditions or hobbies, to sharing transboundary rivers, to sharing the oceans. And also by providing a way to combine and integrate different perspectives of the same space through layering of spatial information. And also by providing a common visual cartographic language for this. You could actually say the GIS has the potential to be a peace building tool almost by design. So more formally at Esri, we often describe the different dimensions of GIS by defining it as simultaneously a system of record, so compiling different data sets that might represent different factors of interest for different stakeholders in a same geography. A system of analysis and insight, so providing new information by integrating and combining these layers to see how they interplay, where they conflict, where they don't. and a system of engagement. So they're really by convening stakeholders around the table, around this common visual language that is a map, allowing to see actually very often the other's perspective on this common shared space. I want to give you a quick concrete example. We actually unpacked this at the time and came up with all sorts of examples. We don't have time to go through them, and you know, we'll hear, I guess, of some of those over the course of the discussions. But I do want to give you a concrete example coming straight out of the mine action sector. So the process of releasing land, hazardous land, back to use obviously starts by mapping where the hazardous areas are, where are the minefields. But actually, interestingly enough, once you have that, it's like you have a bit of a complicated problem on your hand, which is, you know, where do you clear first? You know, where are the clearance organizations going to have the maximum and quickest impact? And more importantly, whose preference and needs should be taken into account when doing that prioritization? Is it national development goals? Is it local community needs? If you say it's local community needs, do we clear land around the school first or the hospital? And so really, even there, just the fact of clearing that land after conflict actually runs the risk of generating new conflict. And so you have this sort of interplay between, you know, between the sort of post-conflict actions and the management of space. And so to help inform this decision, we developed at the time a tool within the IMSMA environment called Prisma, Priority System for Mine Action, which essentially is a site, what we call a site suitability tool. It scores these hazardous areas according to criteria defined by stakeholders themselves. So in this case, they would, you know, the criteria were proximity of those hazards to roads and to schools and to hospitals, and stakeholders can weight the importance according to them. And so you can imagine if you run a tool like that by several stakeholders, then you get an idea of where there's consensus on these priorities, and that helps anticipate potential conflict. So I just wanted to give this sort of one of many examples, concrete examples of how GIS, in fact, overlaps here, this sort of world of humanitarian and peace. Now, these concepts are nice, of course, but really what counts is our ability to actually put them in practice, but also importantly, learn and continuously improve in as efficiently as we can. So the question is, how can the peacebuilding community gain most impact and most quickly from applying spatial analysis? And this is where I think we can pivot to the humanitarian GIS experience and maybe provide a bit of a cautionary tale, as I was saying. So rather than extol on all the success stories, you know, what mistakes might we learn from as we move forward with GIS for Peace? So humanitarian GIS has grown enormously over the last 20 years. Just a handful of organizations applying GIS to humanitarian work in the early 2000s. Now we have, you know, hundreds of humanitarian organizations, maybe in thousands. Esri's non-profit program that helps nonprofits access licenses, for example, has grown tenfold since 2015 only. Our disaster response program, which provides search capacity support, has seen an exponential rise in its sort of 16 years of existence. So we have these indications, I think, that really show us that the importance of GIS is taking in humanitarian operations. But it's a growth, well, first of all, it's a growth that's come, of course, by demonstrating clear success and benefits, but it's a growth that's been very organic, very messy at times. And still today, it can be quite hard to get a sense of structure in this very dynamic field of practice. We're quite opportunistic, for example, in catching technological innovations on the fly to see if they stick. We spend a lot of time and energy wading through a huge amount of potential solutions to a problem, most of which turn out to be irrelevant or not suited. Very nice and appealing because they use lots of great tech, but not necessarily what we're actually looking for. So to recap those points, in the humanitarian GIS sector, we've seen an organic and quite messy growth process and quite a technocentric and supply-driven approach to progress. So those are my first two cautionary points around building out a community practice around GIS. And then the final one is data, but then what? We've during that time, and out of necessity, there's been a huge focus on data quantity, data quality, but I think to the detriment of spatial data science and analysis. Excuse me, almost as if, we feel that if we get that last bit of data, all of our spatial problems will be resolved. Exaggerating a little bit, but I do think our collective energy has actually been hijacked to a certain extent by this focus on data, and really and less focus on what we actually end up with data. I'm not convinced that we're as good at defining spatial analysis problems when it comes to humanitarian action as we could and we should possibly be at this stage, given the enormous impact that we know we could be having. And so there's I think a lost opportunity for impact there by not having thought about what we can do with what we've got. Right. So the idea then would be to try and balance that approach out with a bit more of a use case centric approach. So can both the humanitarian community and the peace community, could we not benefit from turning that question around from time to time and get better at asking ourselves, what are we actually trying to achieve? And of course, what spatial analysis is appropriate for what we're trying to achieve? And can we not already do something with the tools and the data that we do have? So, again, it's close enough is good enough. And this expression of problem well defined is a problem half solved. And I think I really believe in this, because I think that once you've got that problem well defined, you'll actually find that there are a lot of solutions available to you that you might not have thought of otherwise. So how can we collectively get better at defining the spatial problem in the context of humanitarian programs and operations, and by extension now in this discussion, of course, in the context of peace programs? So essentially, the questions that we want to be answering are: what are the spatial dimensions of my programmatic and operational objectives? So really defining that problem, getting good at defining the spatial problem. And that's not an intuitive thing to do. What are the best humanitarian or GIS solutions for my particular programmatic or operational objectives? What has been done before? Don't reinvent the wheel. And also, who has done similar work? And the difficulty there, of course, is navigating the universe of solutions and actors that already exist, and trying to find a way of structuring that universe so that we can be efficient at discovering them and identifying them. So I think this is what we're going to be jumping into in the next presentations and during the Q&A, right? What we really want to be building out. We want to be building out a taxonomy of programmatic and operational use cases. And this is what we're only doing now in the humanitarian GIS sector. And so this is what I'm saying, we have an opportunity with Peace to start with that, or at least to start much earlier with that process. And we'll be hearing, I guess, from Shaz on this, right, in a minute. A mapping exercise between these use cases and currently available spatial data methods and tools, and then mechanisms for operationalization, but also sharing of best practice, and putting in an effective feedback loop from field to research, proactive knowledge exchange hubs, and regular state of humanitarian GIS or state of GIS for peace events that take stock of best practice from a very use case centric point of view. So we've given this a go. I'm running out of time, I think. We've given this a go with the humanitarian GIS sector. I'm just going to jump out of actually, no, I won't. I will give you my last slide, which is just a screenshot of the Humanitarian GIS Hub, which we've been developing over the last few years, over the last year, which does that, which tries to organize humanitarian GIS resources around a set of, around a taxonomy, a set of disaster risk response, disaster risk reduction phases, around information management cycle phases, around spatial analysis questions. So really try and disentangle all of these different dimensions so that you can find your solution that corresponds to the intersect of all of these different dimensions. Since I'm running out of time, what I would suggest is that maybe during the Q&A we can review it, maybe if relevant, and see how it can link with our GIS for Peace discussions here. So thanks very much for listening. Looking forward to the discussion after this, and I will hand over to Shaz now. Thank you.
Awesome, Olivier. Thank you so much. Yeah, lots of amazing points, and I'll go right to you, Shaz, without any hesitation. So, Shaz, can you talk a little bit about how the more specifically about how the peace building sector stands to benefit from geospatial thinking and tech, and we're hoping that you could provide further examples of this. Over to you, Shaz.
Thank you so much, and Olivier. I second everything you just said. I've been taking vigorous notes from everything you've said because I think it aligns extremely well with where we are coming from the peace building field also. So as Saurabh already mentioned, my name is Shazia Young, and I am the Senior Research Associate at the Alliance for Peace Building with our Learning and Newly Evidence team. For those of you who don't know of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, I think Saurabh mentioned already, we're a membership organization. We have 150 plus member organizations that work in 181 countries to end violent conflict and build sustainable peace. In terms of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, we focus on just three main technical expertise or capacities. We focus on memberships and partnerships, as you can see from our vast membership network. We focus on design, monitoring, and evaluation capacities in the peace building field writ large, as Saurabh already mentioned. And we also do a lot of policy and advocacy as well. So these three technical capacities kind of have one main objective in mind, and that is to push the peace building field forward, to help the peace building field develop and grow as best it can. So with that being said, the peacebuilding field still is a very young field. It still is in its nascent stages. We're still trying to figure out what our shared identity is. Do we, have a definition, a shared definition for what peace looks like? And that kind of dabbles a little bit with you, Olivia, because we're internally looking at what we want from the peacebuilding field, what we think sustainable peace is, and then how can we work towards it? So I think that the peacebuilding field being in its young stage has a lot of pros, it has a lot of cons, but I think one of the biggest pro is we still have very low barriers to adoption of new practices, of new processes, of new technologies like geographic information systems, which is very exciting. And I would say it's almost quote unquote right or best situated for incorporating and best leveraging the geographic information system sphere into peace building. I was in a very interesting conversation last week, and one of the experts in our field mentioned, where does conflict and violence take place? And she said it does take place in physical space on the ground. And so therein, where does the solution lie? The solution lies in physical space on the ground. So if we as a field are better able to map where are we seeing conflict, where are we seeing violence, where are our key stakeholders to the conflict and violence, can we map out what our push and pull factors are, what the stressors are, and if we have all that information accurately, as accurate as possible, mapped out, we have already half the answer defined. And that is what you said, Olivia, a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And I personally see geographic information systems, the GIS technologies, platforms, data, best being able to use within the peace building field over here. I think I have to also mention COVID-19 because it was something that really pushed the field, the peacebuilding field, to look more towards GIS, to look more towards remote technologies and platforms. And as a membership organization, we were hearing a lot from our member organizations, and it's challenging. Most of our work is so ingrained in that face-to-face interaction, in being present in a physical space to conduct our programming, that how do we keep doing this effectively in the long run when everything is remote? We can't go places, we can't gather together, we can't meet people, we can't collect data in person. So what do we do? And as part of that initiative, the Alliance for Peacebuilding really started digging deep into the peacebuilding field, because historically, the Peacebuilding, we work in remote locations. We do work with hard to access populations. And so we strongly believe that there are a lot of creative and innovative approaches that are already being used that we could bring to the surface and highlight. And as part of that endeavor, we realized, we were actually pretty surprised that there are a lot of organizations already using geographic information systems. And if they weren't already using it, they are using it now as a rapid response to COVID-19. So with that, I'm gonna quickly share my screen and walk you through 3 examples that I would like to share today. There we go. So I think one of the examples, and we were able to highlight this in our Creativity in Crisis video series, and this is again part of the same effort to find these innovative approaches and then turn them into a quick 5 to 7 minute video to highlight what was done, what was the challenge, how can we learn from this and push forward as a field. So ID Analytics is an organization that's based in Haiti, and they work in building tech capacities amongst the youth of Haiti. So when COVID-19 hit, their emergency rapid response was to sort of map out the health infrastructure in Haiti to see which areas were best prepared to respond to COVID-19 and which areas needed a little bit of help and assistance to respond to COVID-19. As you can see, the yellow areas are actually areas that were least vulnerable because they had adequate coverage of healthcare facilities, access to equipment, access to treatment centers, and then the darker the blue goes, the more vulnerable those populations get. They, at the end of this mapping exercise, they weren't expecting this. They said it was such a powerful visual tool to communicate how disparate that gap was for inequities and access to healthcare, just basic healthcare facilities. Because if you see, the least vulnerable areas are actually concentrated around the capital of Haiti and around the major cities, and everything else is extremely vulnerable to, in this case, COVID-19, but also just addressing any kind of health crisis or health needs. So this was extremely helpful for them to then advocate for, okay, which areas in Haiti really need help, assistance, and attention to help combat COVID-19 right now. Another example was Nauru International, and they are a membership organization of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, and we were also able to highlight them in our Creativity in Crisis video series. They were able to use remote sensing technology with Landsat 8 satellite imagery to kind of map out growth in livelihoods to see which areas in different parts of Nigeria were able to bounce back from conflict and which areas were still struggling to bounce back. So if you see, all these 3 images are off the same plot of land, but with applied remote sensing technologies, they were able to provide a gradient of colors in the last slide over here to show which lands had cultivated and which lands had not cultivated. So this was kind of used for their program design to then say, okay, which geographic areas need the most assistance from us, and where can we start implementing programming to help kind of I don't want to say troubleshoot, but kind of help them get back on track to bouncing back. And lastly, we were not able to highlight Amnesty International's program in our Creativity in Crisis video series, but it is a phenomenal use of GIS in conflict analysis and conflict mapping. So it's in this report called Remaking the Raking State, and we are happy to provide the link. It is an open public document. If anyone's interested, please reach out. We're happy to provide the link. What they were able to do is, and all these images are from the report also. They were able to use the changing landscapes to track the phase of conflict and map that with what the official response from the government was. So as you can see, both of these are the same area that has been mapped over a couple of months. And this initially was where they saw burned villages. And then in a couple of months, you could see exactly where those burned villages were and how the new structures being built over there. So this kind of gives them an insight into conflict analysis. What are we seeing? Is the conflict escalating? Is the conflict de-escalating? How do we best intervene here? Or are we best suited to intervene? Is this a good geographic location where we would want want programming versus where we wouldn't want programming. So I'm going to quickly stop share. Those are three of the examples that I would like to share with you all today. And I think just in terms of last thoughts and comments, I don't think the question is, if GIS has a space in the peace building sector. I think we all know the answer to that. It's yes, it absolutely does, and we need more of it. That being said, it still is an exception to use GIS in the peace building field and not the norm. And I personally would love to see it become the norm. And with that, I think I just have in my head, there's two main questions that I think we need to answer. It's how can we make GIS more accessible to the peace building sector writ large? And related to that, how are we, able to better disseminate the plethora of resources available for GIS? Because there is a lot, there's more open source platforms and hubs that is coming, but how can we better just disseminate that within the peace building field? And I genuinely believe if we are able to answer these two questions, we will see a lot more utilization of GIS writ large within the peace building sector. That's it for me. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Shazia, and amazing examples. And I feel like what you just, the questions you posed is a really good segue for our next speaker, Laura. I think, Laura, you're going to take us through maybe a potential answer to that question that Shazia just posed. So over to you, Laura.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen very quickly. All right. Okay, so hi everyone, just to introduce myself, my name is Laura Mills and I am the Director of Data Science and a co-founder of the nonprofit Data Science for Sustainable Development. We provide data science, GIS, and software development spheres to initiatives and projects centered around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So very excited to talk to you today about a project we call GIS for Peace and kind of draw together what Olivier and Shazia already spoke about. So just to start us off, back in August, my team at DSSD participated in the Alliance for Peace Building's Tech for Peace series, and we had an introductory webinar that showed how to leverage GIS for different peace building efforts and sort of where we could start with that. And from here, we were connected to Olivier and introduced to the broader Humanitarian GIS Hub, which he spoke about, and hopefully we can go through a bit later. But he also proposed this idea of GIS for Peace, an initiative, and we began discussions on how to properly build out that project. So I can explain what GIS for Peace is a little more specifically, where we are now, and how we want to proceed with it in the future and engage the peace building community as we build out that project. So yes, as Olivier already explained, the Humanitarian GIS Hub currently being built by Esri allows users to navigate the possibilities of GIS-driven humanitarian response via various lenses. So use cases, through the use case approach, they're bundled by operational phase or information management type of analysis technology. So as actors prepare for and manage, but also deliver humanitarian response, the hub seeks to close those gaps in accessibility, but also approachability, and then ultimate application of GIS. So our team at DSSD is constructing a parallel project to this hub called GIS for Peace, and it's one that will be embedded within, but also woven into the Humanitarian GIS Hub. But it has a little more of a specific purpose, and that's to more intensely explore how GIS-driven humanitarian response promotes peace, and to align all of our use cases and ontology with the Humanitarian GIS Hub, but also that broader objective of peace. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the Humanitarian GIS Hub, you'll see that our initiative is currently under development. So to echo what Olivier already explained, we're working under this belief that peace isn't analogous with the absence of conflict. Instead, it relates more to the diffusion of tension and mitigation of future conflict. So those efforts, they're quite difficult, but they also call for nonviolent and collaborative ways of facilitating decision-making between parties in that shared space. It involves a consensus of how to use a shared space. And then what better way to talk about the use of space than with mapping technologies and tool sets. So we're using GIS as a very common visual language, as Esri likes to phrase it, that unites people across cultures and across backgrounds and across the world. And the GIS Hub will further explore the potential for GIS technology for shared peace and consensus over space. And ultimately, it hopes to increase the uptake of GIS by the peacebuilding community. That is really quite our audience. So a little more about DSSD and how we're approaching this from a technical standpoint. We're a nonprofit organization, as I said, that works in data science and GIS. We support technically trained organizations in the humanitarian, development, and conservation spheres, and we're large proponents of open source and data and data sharing in general, which we hope to embrace as we build out this parallel hub. And we've been building up a team to tackle this challenge of GIS for peace. So we're working with, for example, the GeoBoundaries team, which is within William Mary's GeoLab, an undergraduate geospatial data science research group out of William and Mary. And they're the publishers of the world's largest open source set of administrative boundaries used across the peacebuilding community already. So we're using them as our GIS experts. And they're collecting use cases and data sets and drawing the connection between how these are applied in the peacebuilding world and just GIS analysis in general. And an example use case, Shazia went through a couple, but we're looking at different indices. For example, the Inform Risk Index, and it's a global open source risk assessment for humanitarian crises and disasters. It gives 191 countries a risk assessment profile and looks at other components of risk, such as food security. So that's important in national and regional assessments, but also the geo-visualization of those risks. So those are the types of data sets and use cases that we hope to embed within this project. And then, of course, as GeoBoundaries and the wider DSSD volunteer base provides the technical foundations for GIS for peace, including the build out of this hub, which will be done like the Humanitarian GIS Hub on using Esri's ArcGIS Hub software. The team at Alliance for Peacebuilding is providing our peacebuilding expertise, of course, and especially our ontology guidance. So conceptually, we're looking at GIS as not a set of tools solely for the technologist anymore. Digital map making has broadened and is more mainstream now. So as we embrace its ability to empower everyone, would just be freely accessible and also approachable, as I said, AFP's role in this project is to drive the democratization of mapping and analysis for the wider peacebuilding community. So they tell us about our audience, what they look like, what they need, and how we can present that information in a way that is adjusted to the evolving needs of the peacebuilding community. So more specifically, AFP has structured the ontology for how we categorize use cases and data collection based on its IRENE peacebuilding database. And this database, which has been compiled over the past 2 years, is composed of over 2,000 peacebuilding indicators from over, 3,000, peacebuilding indicators from over 2,000 publicly available resources. And measures are sorted into 7 program areas. So those are dispute resolution, governance, perceptions of safety and security, resilience, social cohesion, trust, and violence reduction. So as we tag use cases under these 7 categories, we're also looking to weave it into the Humanitarian GIS Hub under its different information management phases. So we hope to take this as an example of how we can unite the 2 hubs in future and different projects like this within the GIS for Peace Hub. So just an example of how we're proceeding with the ontology so far. And then also as we formalize our ontology and categorize use cases accordingly, we're looking at design and format for this hub. So right now we would like to start with an introduction to what is GIS for Peace, how do we use it, a use guide for people, because we're looking at GIS on a spectrum. There may be people who are not familiar and don't use it every day. We have others who are GIS experts and use it in their everyday work. So we want to do that. We are looking at connecting people to our use case repository by piece theme as laid out by the IRENE database. We also want to look at featured applications, web apps, and dashboards that combine GIS and piece building, but also what we call data narratives and case studies. What are the ways that GIS has been used successfully and creatively so far, sparking the inspiration for how to approach a project from a spatial analytical framework. So next steps as we build out this platform, including its rollout, which we hope to really do in the new year. Right now it is just a container in the Humanitarian Gis Hub. We're looking at establishing a feedback loop, excuse me, for usability, but also usefulness. Is this helping people? Is it meaningful? But we also are looking to have a more guided means for community engagement. This is not just us listing data sources and applications and then not really connecting to our audience. So as piece builders use GIS, we want a way to more formally interact with them, but then also represent what they're doing in terms of their work and adequately describe that so others can be connected. So it is very community based. It's not supposed to be one person reading a website and then not ever interacting with the people creating it at large. It's not just DSSD or AFP or Esri. It is really a platform meant for all who use it. So thank you to everyone who is a part of this introduction to GIS for Peace. And we look forward to continually engaging with those who will hope to use the platform. So I'll hand it back to you, Saurav, and we can talk more about how we can continue to be with people who want to use this in the future, things like that. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura, and thanks for that call for action. And on behalf of all of us, right? Like that's sort of the purpose of introducing the GIS for Peace, is like so that we can sort of call for engagement with us. And I'm going to be sharing our emails at the end for everyone. So if you have any sort of input or questions, you'd obviously can always reach out to us. But I wanted to take a couple of moments. We have about 15 minutes for questions, and I see there are a couple of questions that have been outlined already. One of the questions, and I think this is something that we grapple with all the time. I guess it's more of a comment than a question. Lisa Church says, these are great examples of GIS and humanitarian development programs. The last example of conflict mapping is more directly related to peace building. I guess I wanted to kind of get your thoughts about sort of these intersections of humanitarian development and peace building, and sort of, yeah, like how do you think GIS tech can grapple with these intersections or incorporate them? I just wanted to throw that question out there for you all.
Who's going to
Olivia,
go first?
do you want to
go ahead? No, go first. Go first.
I mean, I think you also have a lot to say, given that, you've been working in the humanitarian sector and coming into
Sure.
peace building as well. But I can quickly just mention that we are seeing a lot of, the whole HDP nexus is, everyone's talking about it, everyone's trying to conceptualize it, everyone's realizing that, we do have a lot of programs that are development programs, but do have some aspects of peace building incorporated into it. There are also predominantly peace building programs, but do also have some development objectives and humanitarian objectives ingrained within it. So those were some of the examples that, weren't clear cut, like the Amnesty International was a clear cut peace building program. The other two were more development and humanitarian focused examples, but they did in the programming have elements of just peace building interwoven with it. And we do want to just limit it to peace building and purely peace building. We do want to highlight the ones that are looking at the nexus and highlighting ones that are looking at peace building also, to kind of inspire solutions around our shared challenges.
You literally took the words out of my mouth. I was about to respond that we talk a lot about the nexus. We hear a lot about the nexus, but how does one do nexus? And GIS is definitely a way of doing that. It's literally designed to integrate these different perspectives and these different dimensions, and acknowledge and make explicit the fact that there are linkages between conflict and between humanitarian and between development and between environment, and that's what it's all about. And one of the hardest things that I found when we were working on this Humanitarian GIS Hub was to just put boundaries around it. You know, somehow at some point you've got to stop. You've got to find what is the model of framework that you're going to pick to do a best of estimation of what humanitarian GIS is, but it's infinite. I mean, it's a completely fuzzy boundary between that and development and peace. But that's a great thing. That's actually also a great thing about GIS, is that it allows us to account for that and benefit from it. So for me, there's in this GIS for peace concept, there is the fact of learning, how to do spatial analysis, or learning from experience of where spatial analysis has worked. But I think there's also the fact of establishing a framework that does nexus, and that's exactly what I was going to be pointing at. So thanks for that. Yeah.
I will add too that every data science and GIS project that I've seen has not been looking at an analysis and trying to replicate it. It's always a cocktail of different approaches, and I think this is exactly where you can, the Humanitarian GIS Hub, GIS for Peace, these broader initiatives are where you go for inspiration in a multitude of ways, looking at how there's an approach in one part and how you can combine that over here and over here. So it is supposed to be that conglomeration of many different ideas into one.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to move to Lily's question. Lily asks, given that land use is often a common trigger for conflict, curious if you all have used GIS around that issue, and more importantly, how you do it safely so as not to create more tensions. I'm thinking also of cases where greater transparency over land use may actually expose corruption and human rights abuses. That then may trigger a crackdown from government or other actors benefiting from that activity. Olivier, I'm gonna go to you, because I felt like when you did present your work around the mine issue, I think there was some element of whose purpose are we fulfilling with this, right? Like, so could you talk about that question and perhaps reflect on?
That's spot on, absolutely. I mean, the question is exactly, it speaks really to a lot of the issues and the problems, the challenges that the mine action sector faces when it's releasing land. If you think about it, when you're releasing land that goes from it goes from being a known hazard and therefore a value 0 to suddenly being land of huge value, potential value in terms of construction or agriculture. There's a lot of conflict of interest just in terms of just there. And so it is a huge topic. I don't have an answer for it. I can just tell you, Lily, that indeed it is something that is being handled and so handled is being addressed and this is what that Prisma tool is exactly about, is to make it a bit objective is the wrong word, because things are never objective, but if you're able to compare how prioritization is done through one stakeholder lens and how prioritization is done through another stakeholder lens, if there's consensus, you have no problem. You have no problem, then you know that you can go ahead. If there isn't consensus, that's when at least it doesn't give you an answer, but at least it can help you anticipate the fact that you might be inadvertently wading into a new conflict. So GIS is indeed used for that in that sense. It doesn't give you it doesn't give you the answer of what to do about it necessarily, but it certainly clarifies the problem or makes it quite explicit.
Yeah, and I think very related to that is, peacebuilding programs, we often do conflict analysis conflict sensitivity analysis, right? Like all of the peacebuilding programs have to be conflict sensitivity or conflict sensitive. So I would pitch doing conflict sensitivity before any types of peacebuilding project programs. That's, I think, a big part of peacebuilding work to begin with. Just wanted to plug conflict sensitivity as well. Yeah. Anyone else want to reflect on that?
Yeah, so I was just gonna, agree with both of you and everything. And that is also why the more we look at this incorporation between GIS and the peace building field on a more, writ large level, the more we're going to run into these situations, and we still have to think through what that means. Like Saurav already mentioned, we have do no harm principles, we have conflict sensitivity that we do incorporate within our programming, but when you add GIS as a component within that programming, all those principles should apply to how we conduct GIS. And I think as we start to see more uses of GIS within peace building, we're going to start that conversation. Okay, how do our conflict sensitivity and do no harm principles apply within GIS? How do we have data privacy? How, it is sensitive data. And just to be completely frank, like there are some of the images in my presentation that I cannot reveal the name of the location because that is all sensitive information. So in terms of ethics, in terms of data privacy, in terms of conflict sensitivity and do no harm principles, this is still an ongoing conversation, but very well aware, and we're still working through it. And would love
that's actually another example of exactly where GIS for Peace can learn from the humanitarian, because that is a very hot topic in humanitarian work, for exactly the same reasons: data sensitivity, personally identifiable information, all of those issues. And those are ongoing conversations. What's the point of having two parallel ones, on that particular topic, right? So if we're able to connect the GIS for Peace community to that conversation, and we've already there sort of skipped a few steps in the learning process that the humanitarian sector has had to go through, right? Because the connection is made immediately.
Great. Laura, do you have any reflections on that?
I really would echo everything that they say about it, and the way GIS piece can really demonstrate like a lot of the solution making. So I would really just say everything that they that they said again. I think both of them.
All right, no worries. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, everyone. Okay, so Peter Kent asks, thank you for a fantastic presentation. I agree. Thank you. Thank you all once again. Do you see a way of connecting GIS and predictive analytics to forecast refugee movements, both within countries, IDPs, and out away from national conflicts?
I can answer this question too, because actually a lot of my work focuses on this. I've actually been involved in projects that are looking to combine both a deep learning approach to combine both satellite imagery and census information, socioeconomic information, to look at migratory flows and the movements of people, anticipating those trends. So yes, I think that's entirely possible. I think it's been looked at a security perspective. I think there's increasing literature about involving the humanitarian world in that. But I think that actually is quite the way to use that, and to draw in programs like Google Earth Engine with this massive amounts of satellite imagery to look at it from this perspective. I don't think that is necessarily the inherent approach to it, but there's been a lot of success lately in doing that. And I am personally quite interested in looking to see where that evolves in the future, because I do know there is a growing amount of study about that concept specifically. I'm not sure if others have also noticed.
Just to jump in there, I mean, I don't know how quickly the audience is getting the links that we're sending, but I just, in response to Peter's question, I put in a link there to an ebook called The Language of Spatial Analysis. And I really like the way Peter put his question, because it's precisely the sort of way to formulate a question with the spatial dimension that really allows us to immediately go to, what is the GIS solution for that, because it already incorporates an understanding of what that spatial dimension is going to be. And in this ebook, what that tries to do, and in fact the Humanitarian GIS Hub, which I'm hoping you also got a link for, provides one of the dimensions that you can search resources by is by spatial analysis question types. And it ranges from just the basic where are things right now to where will be things, to what are spatial patterns and how do they change, and then also to predictive questions, and also to sort of prescriptive questions. Where should we be putting things, right? And so And that is common to all sectors. That is common to all sectors that deal with geography, whether it's humanitarian, peace, or any other sector of work. And I guess there's a commonality there as well in terms of how we can share experience from humanitarian, or not just experience, but share the community, the humanitarian GIS community of practice, and GIS for peace. The commonality is in being able to formulate questions spatially and place them on that scale of spatial questions, exactly as Peter did. So, using GIS for predictive analysis to forecast refugee movements. This is an absolute predictive where question. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Olivier. And yeah, just looking at the clock here, it seems like we sort of have to round out this conversation. Just want to, say big thank you to all of you. Thanks for the amazing presentation, and thank you also to the NYU team for doing this. Branka, thank you so much. I forgot to mention you at the start of my conversation because I was running through my talking points, but really appreciate you having us here as well. Yeah, and just want to say, I think I've learned a lot, but I think one of the things that I will take away from this conversation is, this reminded me of a philosopher, Slavoj Žižek, who says the purpose of philosophy is not to find answers, but to ask better questions. So I think that's what I've learned from this conversation is how I can ask better questions about GIS and potentially find answers. So I don't know if you guys have final thoughts really quick. We have about 2 minutes. I want to open up the floor to you all. Yeah.
I guess I can go really quick. I just want to echo that I am extremely excited. When I first started studying peace and conflict studies, and I was doing GIS training also, I was the only peace builder in the room that was doing GIS training. And then when I first moved to DC, I was in most rooms the only peace builder when it came to GIS experts and people who are working in the GIS field. And so to be able to be on a panel like this, where all of us are coming together to complement each other's work and collaborate with one another is just extremely exciting. And I'm so excited to see how the GIS for Peace platform pushes us forward. So thank you for having me.
In a similar vein, I would say that what I've learned from this project is you can come in from that GIS perspective, but I think the value fundamentally of this type of project, of Humanitarian GIS Hub and GIS for Peace, other initiatives, like-minded initiatives, is the diversity of perspective. As we ask better questions, it involves not just the GIS experts in the room, not just the peace builders, even if it is a question in a project guided towards peace, there's an ethicality to it. There is the technical perspective. So it's really to build that community of people who can work together towards one common goal, and very excited to see where this goes in the future. So thank you, everybody.
Olivier, final word to you.
Yeah, just my final points would be one to echo yours, Sarah, which is really the best way I think of making progress here in this community would be to get good at asking the right spatial questions. The solutions are out there. There's a ton of them. That's not the problem. The problem is getting good at asking the right spatial questions. And then secondly, I'd say, let's look at GIS as a way and an opportunity to really do the nexus right. So thanks very much for listening, and thanks to all of the speakers.
Sorry, Olivier. I just wanted to say, we have shared our emails in the chat. If you want to specifically get involved in the GIS for Peace, please reach out to Laura, Shazia, and myself. We are happy to have you involved. We're also going to be sharing out a survey to sort of take stock of the community around peacebuilding and GIS. So if you want to take part in that survey and just contribute to making this space like a community space, that would be awesome. So just wanted to share that as well. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate you spending your time with us today, and hope you have a good conference.